The third issue that we're looking at is gender. This is an issue in sport, and especially football, as it is believed to be gender equality is far from equal. In most occasions, it's found that it isn't equal on women in many different ways, with the main one being that the amount of money is in the game compared to the men's game, to the women's game, and how this affects lots of different aspects that affects the equality of the gender. Historically, the equality in gender with sport used to a lot worse than it is now. It was once that only men really played the sports, and there were no girls' teams that were recorded in data or even focused on by the public. It then slowly changed to there being games that girls was more thought about playing in, like tennis and netball, but they're still never as competitive as the men's game, where it is to now, where the women's play all the same sports as men's, but it's still that the men's games are much more focused on. With this being the issue in football towards the women's game, it affected everyone involved in the game, from the players and the staff to the officials and the fans. One of the main problems is the difference in money in the two games. This is affecting everyone as it limits the women's game more with less money. For example, they are at a huge disadvantage with their facilities, coaches, equipment, so therefore they can't quite progress at the same rate as the men's, as it's harder for them to become better with worse things. This will be affecting the players from all ages in their development and skills, and then as well as coaches won't get as much support or the best staff, where they won't be able to get the best ideas or the best training for the players. To add to this, for games, the women's games are held at a lot worse stadiums compared to the men's, and also the officials for the games will be worse, as they will be on more of a budget with things like this. With this being the case, it affected the fans, as they are not able to be at the game with as much atmosphere due to this, and with the players not being able to progress much, the standard will be worse, meaning the games may not be as fun to watch. To show the difference in stadiums, you have Brighton and Hove, where their men's team play at the Amex with a capacity of around 30,000, and the women's play at Culver Road that has a capacity of around 2,000. This just shows how big the difference between the games are. A big impact of the differences in money is due to the games being on TV, as clubs will get paid lots and lots of money for this. On TV, you see a lot more men's games televised than women's, which adds to how much money they're making. This affects the fans in the way that young girls getting involved with football than young boys, as they are more likely as boys are more likely as the standard is higher. Another part that will be added to this is the stereotype of boys and girls, where it is seen as boys are more the really sporty ones and the girls aren't as much, when this is not the case, but does however have a big impact on the amount of girls that will get themselves into sport and football through their parents as well. The other reason why there is less money in the women's game is mostly down to there being a lot less money invested into the game compared to the men's. This will be for every club, for everything from club sponsors, player wages, TV, and so on, meaning that there is less money produced and there is less money invested. With this occurring, there are positives and negatives for both games, comparing the men's and the women's, where you will find that the positives for the men's game will switch round and be the negatives to the women's games, and vice versa. The first positive for the men's game is the amount of money that they have in the game. This is a positive for their game, as it means that they are able to get the best stuff of their sport, things like facilities, equipment, coaches, stadiums and groundsmen. This means that it allows for the game to be at the best throughout and offers the best for the fans and all involved. This then is a negative for the women's game, as they have less money put in, as this puts them at a disadvantage and to lead to them not getting the best quality, meaning that they can't fully progress as quickly as the men's game or as they'd like to because they have less money. This then flips it on its head, as it also leads to a positive in the women's game. Despite it putting them at a disadvantage in many aspects, it, however, is a good thing, as it means that the men's game, as it is because the men's game is believed that it can now be more business, and the game has been ruined by the money and taken over. This also creates a lot of conflict, and is said that with it being more of a business, and it takes away the element of excitement and passion, which is one of the best parts of the game. This therefore is a negative for the men's game, but then is a positive, as this is not the case in the women's game, and shows that the people involved are in it for the love of the game and aren't in it for the money side, and as there isn't as much offered to them. Also, another negative for the women's game is with it not being televised as much or talked about on social media, which then this will lead to young women not going to be influenced, so then they are less likely to get involved into the game, and this can lead to the standard being worse as there are less people getting involved. On top of this, as well as the stereotype doesn't help with this, as a young girl won't be pushed more down to the route of football, as it's thought not to be the normal thing to do for a parent, so the parents won't do this. This can come from parents' influences, as well as it is mostly down to the parents in the child's earlier years, where if they follow the stereotype, which is very common, this will affect the amount of involvement they'll push their young girl in football and sports. One big change that is occurring is when there are big events like the World Cup in the women's game or a Premier League game, where they are televising these a lot more than they ever have before. This is a huge change for the sport, as it means that it is getting a lot more people to view the sport and get involved with it, where it helps them become a bigger and better sport. This will also help young girls get influenced to get involved, as they will be able to watch the games a lot more, and also they will be able to have role models as well that can be a good incentive to keep them in the game and push them harder. This change has occurred to get more people watching the sport, so that there can be more exposure to it and get the sports population in the women's game growing. This affects the sport's publicity and exposure, and will help the sport grow even bigger than it's ever been before. An example of this is with the Women's World Cup this year. They broke many records of views, with the final breaking the record for the most views for the women's game of 28.1 million. Also with this is one way where more income from money has come into the game, and there is also more money being invested into the women's game than there ever has been before. This is so that there can be more opportunities with more coaches and teams in the game to build the size of the sport. It also means that they can have better equipment and standard of coaches, meaning that the standard of the players will also improve and will be more fun to watch. This being an effect on sport, as if the standard is better, the fans will prefer to watch it, and then the sport will grow, and this being a positive effect on football as it improves the sport and its growth. An example of this is Lewes FC, where they are the first team to ever have the same players' wage budget for the men's team and the women's team, making it completely fine. Also, this is a change for the men's game, as there is a lot more money in it now. However, with this sport already having lots of money in it, it is believed that the men's game has now been taken over by money. It is believed that players are just in it for the money, and there's no loyalty or willingness to win at all measures. If this is to be the case, it is a negative effect, as it takes away the passion side to it. This has occurred from people investing money into the sport on the business side. Also, with the prices have increased massively for everything in the sport, like tickets for games or other aspects in the sport. This will then have a negative effect on the fans, as it requires for them to spend more money, or if they are unable to not be able to do everything that they will necessarily want to do. For example, for a Brighton ticket, when they played at Withdean, it was around £10 for an adult ticket, whereas now a ticket at the Amex will cost cheapest around £50 for an adult. A recommendation for the future will definitely be with the long-term goal of making it so it is equal as possible, because with this, as much as it would be good for the two to be equal, for this to happen the standards would have to be the same, and this is something that is unlikely to happen and is out of our control. And if it is to happen, it will not happen for a very long time. But a recommendation would be to not have as much money in the men's game and turning it into a business, and for the women's game to have more to help it grow and become a much bigger sport. So just basically to carry on with what they're doing, but push it on a little bit further. To summarise gender inequality in sport, this is very much getting better each year as the women's game is getting a lot more recognition to what it used to get, which is good for the game and will hopefully speed up its process. It is something that is going to take a lot of time due to the difference being so big, but it's definitely going in the right direction as possible if it carries on the way it is going.